The kettle clicked off. But I hadn't poured the tea. I stood there, one hand on the counter, still holding the porcelain cup with the blue ivy trim. It matched the set I'd bought when Edward was born. On the fridge, a magnet still held up the old birth announcement. Welcome, Edward James Ellsworth, £7 2s, June 15, 1985. A fresh email pinged on my phone. It was from Edward's fiancée, Kristen. Just 3 lines. Hi Marjorie. We've decided to keep the engagement gathering small and curated. Thanks for understanding. I read it twice. Then a third time. As if a different meaning might appear. I clicked over to Edward's social feed. There it was. A post of the venue. A vineyard outside Portland, fairy lights everywhere. Captions like blessed, future starts here, the classiest night of our lives. He had never even mentioned the date. The teacup trembled in my hand. I set it down before I dropped it. My fingers were colder than the ceramic. Outside, the wind moved the trees. A branch scraped the window like a question I couldn't answer. I looked around my kitchen. It still smelled faintly of lemon polish. Everything clean. Orderly. Prepared. I had paid the first deposit on the venue. Through the trust fund Harold and I set up when Edward was 6. Kristen's boutique dress. The jazz trio. Even the engraved invitations. They all came from me. From a mother who thought she was building joy. Not a stranger. Not a ghost. I sat down slowly. The chair giving a soft creak under me. Same sound it made when Harold was still here. Reading his books by the stove. I picked up the cup. Took a sip. It was cold now. Tasted like silence. A silence I had not chosen. He was still my son. But in that moment, I no longer knew who I was to him. And that was the real heartbreak. What do you do when the people you raised curate you out of the life you helped build? The photograph sat on the mantel. A younger me in a linen blouse. Edward, on my hip. Harold's arm resting protectively across my shoulders. It had faded at the edges, but the warmth of that day still clung to the paper somehow. The day we signed the papers for the house and brought Edward home for the first time. That living room once echoed with the sound of building blocks spilling across the floor. Now, it held only the occasional creak of wood and the steady tick of the mantel clock. I ran my fingers along the spines of Harold's philosophy books, still neatly arranged by subject. He believed in categories. And I believed in preserving the things we built together. The house had stayed the same. Cedar paneling, pine floors, drafty corners that whispered in winter. But the people inside it had shifted. Like furniture moved when no one's looking. I spent most mornings by the kitchen window, writing in the margins of old books. Or sorting mail no one sent anymore. There was a time when Edward's drawings crowded that fridge. Crayon suns, clumsy stick figures, with huge grins. Now the magnets held up coupons I'd probably never use. I kept a box under my bed. Labeled Edward, before law school. Inside, birthday cards. Ticket stubs from museum visits. His first letter home from college. Dear Mom, I miss your pancakes and your weird facts about library cataloging. I had laughed aloud when I first read it. Now, it made me pause. The laugh didn't come as easily. Neither did the memory of the last time we spoke without caution. He had always been polite. Even when distant. Even now, when he disappeared into that polished world. Where people wore beige and smiled with their teeth, but not their eyes. Kristen was part of that world. So was the vineyard. And the word curated. Not one of mine. Not one Harold would have used. In our home, we celebrated messiness. Bad handwriting, burnt toast, and truth even when it hurt. I looked around. Everything was in its place. Except me. I had become the misplaced piece in a puzzle I once completed. The sun moved softly across the floorboards, touching the edge of Harold's reading chair. I didn't sit there anymore. It felt like trespassing on something sacred. It's strange how silence can feel so full. as if every breath echoes back what no one's willing to say aloud. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. Subject line: just a few thoughts on the house. I opened it slowly, already bracing for the familiar tone. Kristen had attached a mood board. Clean marble countertops, glass cabinets. A bathroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel, not a cedar-framed cottage on the slope of Spencer Butte. She wrote, "We were thinking of refreshing a few things, lighten it up a bit. More open space, modern lines. Less nostalgia." Less nostalgia. I read that part 3 times. It wasn't even her home. And yet, her vision was slowly replacing mine. I forwarded the email to Edward. No greeting. No commentary. Just the subject line changed. Thoughts? He replied within the hour. "Let's not make this into something it's not, Mom. Kristen just has a sense of style. You know how that is." Yes, I did. And I knew how erasure sometimes came in lowercase. In throw pillows, in paint samples. In the gentle repositioning of memory. I walked into the den, where Harold's desk sat untouched. His calendar still pinned to the corkboard, March 2007. The month he passed. I hadn't changed it. That was the last page he turned himself. The scent in that room. Old paper, dried pine, and the faintest trace of his aftershave. It always made my eyes sting. They didn't understand. Kristen saw dark wood and clutter. I saw Harold, writing notes in the margins of Play-Doh, and Edward building Lego castles by the fire. Not everything broken needs fixing. Not everything aged needs replacing. I reached for a small wooden box, with brass hinges and a velvet lining. Inside, a collection of cufflinks, each one given to Harold by his students. He used to say, "A library is a place where time folds gently. You don't renovate memory. You catalog it." Kristen didn't understand that either. And perhaps Edward had forgotten. I closed the box slowly, my hand lingering on the velvet a moment longer than needed. It felt like holding a piece of breath. In the hallway, a faint thud echoed. One of the frames had slipped. It was the photo from Edward's graduation. The corner of the frame had cracked. The glass hadn't shattered, but a line now ran straight across my face. It stayed that way for weeks. No one noticed. Or if they did, no one said a word. One Saturday afternoon, I returned from the market to find strangers in my living room. A couple, young, well-dressed, smiling awkwardly as Kristen gave them a tour. Edward stood near the mantel, arms crossed, silent. My steps faltered. The paper bag in my hands crinkled loudly. Or maybe it was just the silence that made everything sound louder. Kristen turned to me, cheerful. "Oh, hope you don't mind, Marjorie. Some friends of ours are looking for inspiration for their remodel." I looked down. A head of lettuce had rolled from the torn bag. It stopped at Edward's feet. He didn't bend to pick it up. "They just love the vintage touches here," Kristen continued. "Especially this desk, so quaint. Though I told them it could be opened up a bit. Maybe a reading nook?" She gestured toward Harold's desk. Her hand swept through the air, like it could erase the decades that lived in that wood grain. The couple nodded politely. They didn't know they were standing in a room built on grief. On ink-stained hands. On love spelled out in lecture notes and soft-spoken bedtime stories. I cleared my throat. I wasn't aware we were showing the house. Kristen laughed. "Oh goodness, no. Just sharing ideas. You know, fresh eyes and all that." Edward finally spoke. "It's just a conversation, Mom. No need to be territorial." Territorial. I hadn't realized I needed permission to feel tethered to the life I had poured into these walls. They moved into the kitchen. Laughter. Compliments. Talk of light wood floors, and entertaining spaces. I remained in the hallway, next to the closet door, still lined with Edward's childhood height marks, each one drawn by Harold's careful hand. Black ink, smudged with time. I ran a finger down the faded lines. A quiet rebellion. Later that night, I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Inside, a folder labeled Trust Fund Records, Ellsworth. Each page, each signature, a breadcrumb trail of care. I sat with it open in my lap. The house dim except for the pool of light from my bedside lamp. Edward once told me, "Mom, you always keep everything too long." Maybe. But some things weren't just things. They were proof. Proof that I had been here. That I mattered. That this life wasn't built for someone else to curate. That night, I didn't cry. I just folded the folder shut and placed it carefully back where it belonged. I first heard about the engagement party from someone I didn't know. A woman in line at the co-op. She noticed my tote bag. The one with Edward's law firm printed on the side. "Oh, you must be his mother. We're so looking forward to the party. The vineyard sounds magical." My hand froze on the bag of walnuts. I nodded, politely. Smiled, even. But inside, something turned hollow. She walked away, humming, her basket filled with imported cheeses and sparkling cider. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at the spices. None of them had the power to cover what I had just swallowed. At home, I checked my mail again. Just in case. Nothing. I checked my email. Nothing new. Only a promotion from a bookstore I used to love. 20% off memoirs about mothers and sons. I closed the laptop slowly. Then reopened it. Typed Edward's name into the search bar. There it was. An event listing. Public. Ellsworth. Lowry engagement soiree. By invitation only. The photo header showed string lights, long tables under open sky, a palette of sage and ivory. It looked like a dream. It just wasn't mine. I clicked on the guest list. Names I recognized. Neighbors. Colleagues from Harold's old department. Even Professor Danvers, who once mistook me for the department secretary. But not me. Not Marjorie Ellsworth. Not Mom. There had been no mistake. I went to the bedroom. Opened the narrow chest by the window. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a dress I'd bought 3 weeks earlier. A deep navy silk. Not too bold, not too plain. Just enough to say, I'm proud. Just enough to belong. I pressed my palm flat against the fabric. It was cool to the touch. Like water, you're no longer invited to enter. I had paid for the jazz trio. I had paid for the caterer's deposit. I had even paid for the vineyard's rental fee. Through transfers arranged months ago. Discreetly. Lovingly. They hadn't told me. Because they knew I would say yes. And now they didn't need me to say anything at all. I folded the dress back into the box. Carefully. Like laying something to rest. The room was quiet. Only the clock ticked. Even that sounded embarrassed. I called Edward that evening. I told myself I wouldn't. But silence has a way of pressing against the ribs. Until something breaks. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom." Bright. Distracted. I didn't ask how he was. I didn't ease into it. "I heard about the party," I said. Quiet. Even. Like laying a book flat on a table. There was a pause. A small one, but enough to tell me he hadn't planned for this conversation. "Oh, yeah, it's going to be very small. Just a few people. Nothing formal. Neighbors. Professors. Even Danvers," I said. My voice sharper than I meant. He exhaled. A slow sigh dressed up as patience. "Mom, Kristen really wanted it to be curated. Elegant. Less, complicated." I didn't answer. He continued. "It's just that your presence changes the tone. Not in a bad way. Just different. Just different. Like music that doesn't match the room. Like a piece of furniture too worn for the showroom." I closed my eyes. Pressed the phone tighter to my ear. as if proximity could undo distance. You could have told me. I kept my voice from shaking. But only just. I didn't want to hurt you, he said. Which, of course, meant he knew it would. I see, I said. And I did. I saw everything. After we hung up, I sat by the fire and let memory do what it always does. Summon a better time. It was his 7th birthday. Pirate hats and chocolate cake. Harold building a cardboard ship in the backyard. Edward's eyes lit up when I came out dressed as the captain. Mom, he had shouted. His face smeared with frosting. You're the best pirate ever. I'd spent weeks sewing that costume from old curtains. He wore my scarf for a sash. Harold played sea shanties on his record player. That day, I was the center of his world. Now, I was an inconvenient footnote. In a story rewritten without me. The fire crackled beside me. Its heat couldn't reach what had gone cold. Not anymore. The night of the party, I didn't plan to look. But habit is a quiet traitor. And curiosity. A cruel one. I opened my laptop. Typed his name. There it was. A tagged photo from a mutual acquaintance. Kristen stood beneath an arch of eucalyptus and white roses, flanked by lanterns that glowed like captured stars. Edward, in a charcoal suit, smiling that reserved smile he wore at fundraisers. Not like the boy from the pirate ship. Guests milled about in cream linens and polished shoes. Someone had posted a video clip. I clicked. The jazz trio I'd paid for played softly behind the clinking of glasses. Then the toasts began. A friend of Kristen spoke first. Light-hearted stories. Wine-fueled laughter. Then her father. With practiced sincerity. And then Edward. I turned up the volume. Listened. He thanked Kristen. Thanked her parents. Thanked everyone who made this night possible. A long list of names. The venue manager. The floral designer. Even the bartender. But not me. Not once. I wasn't just absent from the room. I was absent from the sentence. I sat in the glow of my screen, the jazz notes still dancing, the applause rising from people who had no idea, who had paid for the chairs beneath them. I didn't cry. It's strange how some heartbreak skipped the ceremony of tears. Instead, I walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a photo album labeled Ellsworth Family, Early Years. Inside, a Polaroid of Edward in the library where I once taught. His hands gripping a stack of books taller than his head. His smile gap-toothed and proud. Harold had captioned it in his looping hand. Someday, he'll build something from all this knowing. I closed the album, stared at the spine, and I wondered, what happens when what they build forgets the ground it rose from? The next morning, I made tea. The same cup. The same quiet. Except now, something had shifted. Not in them, but in me. It started with a receipt, wedged between pages of a gardening magazine I hadn't touched in months. Bah. See. Venue rental, non-refundable. Bill to Ellsworth Trust Fund. The paper was cream-colored. Heavy stock. Too elegant for something so unkind. I ran my finger over the total. The ink hadn't faded yet. Unlike the trust. Harold and I had started it the year Edward turned 10. Not out of wealth, but out of carefulness. Every Christmas bonus. Every saved faculty stipend. We tucked it away for his future. Not just for college, Harold used to say, but for the unknown. This wasn't the unknown. It was the all-too-known. Lavish. Curated. Exclusionary. I opened the file drawer beneath my desk. Pulled out the ledgers. Handwritten. Every line inked with hope. And there it was. Another line item. Boutique bridal purchase. 3,600. Followed by entertainment deposit. 2,0. All dated within the last 3 months. All without a word to me. I stared at the page. Then at the window. Rain tapped softly on the glass. As if to say, "You knew this, didn't you?" I called the bank. Confirmed the withdrawals. Confirmed the authorizations. "Edward Ellsworth has full access as co-trustee," the woman said, her voice neutral. Professional. "Yes," I replied. "I know." And I did. Because I'd given him that authority. Signed it over when he turned 30. Just in case, I had said. Trust. The cruelest word when broken quietly. I hung up the phone. Let the silence fall heavy. Then I reached for Harold's fountain pen. Still resting in the ceramic dish he had made in college. The cap clicked softly. A sound I used to love. I wrote nothing. Just held it. Some betrayals don't need words. They ink themselves across the chest. And still, I couldn't quite believe it. Not until I found the thank you card. A pale gray envelope. Addressed to Kristen's parents. Inside, "Thank you for making our dream night possible. Your generosity gave us everything. Everything. Except the truth." I waited 2 days. Not out of patience. Out of disbelief. Then I called him. Straight to the point. I saw the statements. My voice was steady. But something behind my ribs felt like it had caved in. There was a pause. A faint shuffle. As if he were walking through a parking lot. "I assumed you'd come across it eventually," he said. No guilt. No hesitation. Just calm. "You didn't think to ask?" I tried to keep the ache from my throat. Tried, but failed. "You gave me trustee rights, Mom," he replied. "It's a legal arrangement. And it's not like it's being wasted. It's going toward family milestones." Family. I repeated, letting the word taste bitter in my mouth. "I thought that's what the fund was for," he continued. "To support the next generation." "And what about the previous one?" I asked. It came out quieter than I meant. He sighed. That sigh. The same one from high school. When I'd ask him to call if he'd be late. "Mom, you're still living in the past. The house. The old ways. It's not how things are done anymore." "But the money," I pressed. "It wasn't just numbers. It was a tool," he cut in. "Mom, please. Don't turn this into some moral play. It's money. You've always been too sentimental about it." Sentimental. That's what they call it. When you remember what something cost in hours. Not in dollars. There was a silence between us. Not empty. Just final. "I see," I said. Because I did. More than he knew. "Look," he added. "If you're upset, we can talk to a financial advisor. Maybe restructure the account. Make you feel more included." I laughed then. Softly. The kind of laugh that cracks instead of echoes. "Don't worry, Edward," I said. "You've made yourself very clear." We hung up. I sat there with the cordless phone still warm in my hand. As if it had held his voice longer than I could bear to. Then I placed it back on the cradle. Next to a framed photo of Harold. In his graduation robe. Smiling at the woman he once called, the compass of our home. The compass was broken now. But I still knew where true north was. Even if no one else did. That night, I took the ledgers out again. Laid them across the dining table. The one Edward had carved his name into. At age 9. The W still upside down. I turned on the lamp. Its light made the ink glisten like fresh bruises. Line by line. I traced each entry. Each deposit from Harold's extra lectures. Each dollar from my night cataloging shifts. These weren't just numbers. They were Saturdays not spent at the lake. They were dresses never bought. They were promises. Bound in paper and faith. I found the clause. Small, almost invisible at the bottom of a notarized document. With discretion granted to both trustees unless revoked in writing. By the original depositor, should she remain living. I blinked. Read it again. Then again. It was mine. Still mine. Not out of pettiness, but out of principle. The next morning, I brewed a full pot of coffee, poured it into Harold's old thermos, opened the drawer, and took out a slim envelope. My lawyer's business card, faded but still legible. The last time I called him, it was to draft Harold's will. I remember how my hand trembled. Not from fear, but from finality. This time, it didn't tremble. I left a voicemail. Hi Leonard. It's Marjorie Ellsworth. I'd like to review a document we set up years ago. There've been developments. I hung up, sat back in Harold's chair. The leather still creaked the same way. Still fit my back like it remembered me. On the desk sat a photo. Me, Harold, and Edward. At the library's 25th anniversary. Edward held a ribbon-cutting scissor. I held his shoulder. He had no idea then that his name would someday be etched into a plaque, paid for by hands he'd grow distant from. I picked up the pen. Not to write, just to feel its weight. Some stories didn't need rewriting, only reclaiming. And I had just found the first page again. I didn't leave in anger. I left because the walls had stopped answering back. 3 weeks after that call, I packed a small suitcase. Only the essentials. A nightgown, Harold's pen, and a book of essays he once gave me, with the inscription, "Your mind is the place I always come home to." The house felt like it was holding its breath. Or maybe I was. I turned off each light slowly, room by room, like saying goodbye to a body after it's passed. The last to go dark was the den, the corner where the desk still stood. I didn't cover it, didn't lock it, just let it be. Like leaving a candle behind in case someone else needs the light. Claire greeted me at the door with open arms. Her apartment smelled like tomato basil soup, and the faintest trace of lavender oil. "I'm not staying long," I said, though I had nowhere else to go. She didn't ask, just showed me to the guest room. Neat, plain, but warm. The sheets were stiff with starch, the kind that remind you they're not yours. Even the pillow resisted the shape of my head, as if waiting for someone else to arrive. I laid on my back, staring at the ceiling. No familiar creak. No shadow of Harold's reading lamp. Only the low hum of traffic. And the rhythmic tick of a cheap wall clock. That didn't know my story. The nightstand held no drawer of clippings. No photo of Edward at age 5. Missing his front teeth. Grinning with a crayon in hand. Just a coaster. A lamp. And silence. I pressed my eyes shut. Tried to imagine home. But it came back distorted. Like a photograph soaked in rain. I thought of Edward. Not the man in a suit. The boy who cried when he lost his mitten. The one who asked me, "If I get old, will you still remember me?" I remembered. Even now. Especially now. I opened my suitcase. Took out the pen. Held it in my palm. It still had weight. Still knew how to balance between my fingers. I wanted to write. But the page stayed blank. There are moments when even ink can't carry what needs to be said. Moments when a pen feels like a weapon. Too sharp for grief. Too blunt for anger. So I closed the notebook. Turned off the bedside lamp. And lay in the dark. With a silence that was not mine. In a room that did not know my name. Even the bed creaked in a language I didn't speak. Even my breath felt like a visitor. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Claire was still asleep. Her apartment was hushed, but not quiet in the way my home had been. There were new sounds here, the low groan of plumbing, a heater clicking on with insistence. Someone's footsteps from the unit above. But none of them belonged to me. I sat at the small kitchen table, with a chipped mug of weak coffee. It wasn't mine either, but I held it like it could warm more than my hands. Across from me was a corkboard filled with Claire's life, grocery lists, snapshots of her grandkids. A dentist appointment reminder tacked in the corner. It struck me that not a single pin on that board had anything to do with me. Not anymore. Once, I had been someone's center. Edward's orbit had circled around my arms for years, first steps, scraped knees, whispered fears in the middle of the night. I was the lighthouse. He was the boy who always came home. Now, he had docked somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't see. Somewhere I wasn't welcome. And what was left? A bank account no longer mine. A house with lights turned off. A name missing from invitations. I hadn't expected old age to feel like erasure. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved, dearly risers shuffling past with coffees, children in backpacks half asleep, the world humming without me. A pigeon landed on the ledge, blinked at me, then flew off. Its wings startled something in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the pull of it. Instead, I felt a stillness. Not peace. Not yet. But the kind of stillness that comes when something inside you goes quiet. Not broken, just done. Done waiting to be remembered. Done hoping to be included. Done asking to belong where I was no longer seen. It wasn't just about the party. It wasn't about the money. It was the slow unraveling of a role I had built my whole life around. Mother. Matriarch. Witness to every first and every fall. And suddenly, I had become an extra in the very story I helped begin. That was the grief no one prepares you for. Not the loss of life, but the quiet resignation from it. No announcement. No applause. Just a key no longer used. Back in the guest room, I opened my suitcase again. This time, I didn't reach for Harold's pen. I reached for the folder I had slid beneath the clothes. The one marked with my handwriting. Original deed, Ellsworth House, 1993. I ran my thumb along the edge. He could take the trust. He could take the party, the praise, the polished speeches. But he would not take my name from the history of that house. Not while I still breathed. And in that quiet room that didn't know my name, I whispered it aloud. Marjorie Ellsworth. Not as a question, but as a promise. Claire poured tea into 2 mismatched cups. The steam curled between us like something sacred. You know, she said gently. Maybe it's time to let it go. I looked down at the chipped rim of the cup. A faded blue flower ran along the edge, almost gone. But still there. Let what go? I asked. Though I already knew. The house. The fight. You've given so much, Marjorie. Maybe it's time to rest. Rest. The word stung more than I expected. As if my story had reached its final chapter. And someone else had written the end. Claire meant well. She always had. But she hadn't watched her name disappear from documents, from decisions, from memories. She hadn't stood in a room that once held every part of her life and realized none of it was hers anymore. She hadn't held silence in her mouth like a coin she couldn't spend. I wrapped both hands around the cup. Not for warmth. For grounding. There's a difference between resting, I said, and being put away. Claire didn't answer. Only reached across the table and touched my wrist. Soft. Sympathetic. But something in me flinched. Not from her touch. From the echo of the word rest. Because that's what they do with things they don't need anymore. They put them in drawers. In closets. In homes with views that face nothing. Later that night, I sat at her window, watching the neighbor's porch light blink on and off. A moth kept hitting the glass. Over and over. Each time stunned. Each time returning. I wondered if that was me. Throwing myself at something I'd never reach. A mother chasing the idea of mattering. A widow clinging to the last name on a deed. But then, I thought of Harold. I remembered the way he signed his letters to me. To my equal partner in everything. Not in silence. Not in surrender. But in everything. That's when I realized. The house wasn't just wood and walls. It was ink. It was sacrifice. It was every choice we made. To build something meant to last beyond us. If I let it go, I wouldn't just be stepping aside. I'd be vanishing. I stood. Walked to the small suitcase in the guest room. Unzipped the front pocket. Inside. A single page. The deed copy. My name. His name. Tucked together at the bottom like roots intertwined. I ran my thumb along the paper's edge. Not shaking. Not this time. I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I was awake. I once knew a woman named Ruth. She was my neighbor when Harold Vi first moved into the cottage on the hill. She lived alone in a yellow house with a lilac tree that bloomed unevenly. One year, it blossomed only on the left side, and she said, "That's where the memories still live." She had a husband once, and a son, both gone. One to illness, the other to silence. When I brought her pies or lent her books, she always smiled politely, but never let me inside. Not the house. Not the pain. I used to think she preferred it that way. Now I wonder if she simply stopped believing she was allowed to belong anywhere. Ruth was the kind of woman who wore pressed skirts even to garden. She collected stamps. Kept her records in pristine alphabetical order. But she never made a sound in the neighborhood meetings. Even when she was overlooked. Even when her fence needed mending. Even when the road crew blocked her driveway for days. Once, someone suggested repaving the road near her home. And she was the only house affected. No one asked her. No one needed to. And Ruth didn't speak. That's what stayed with me. Not her loneliness. Not her grief. But her silence. There was no headline the day her voice went missing. Just one less opinion. One less name on a list. One more woman quietly erased by time and courtesy. I remember the day they moved her to assisted living. She wore lipstick and pinned a brooch to her blouse. Appearances matter, she said. But no one came to take pictures. No one asked for her story. After she left, the lilac tree died. Not all at once. Just petal by petal. Softly. Quietly. Like breath leaving a room. That morning at Claire's, I stood at the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair. And I saw Ruth in the lines at the corner of my eyes. In the way I lowered my gaze out of habit. In the way I folded towels like I didn't live there. And I heard her silence echo inside me like a warning. Like a soft bell before the door shuts. This will not be my story, I said aloud. Not a vow. A decision. I didn't know the next step yet. But I knew the first. I would take up space again. I would make a sound. Even if it cracked. Even if it trembled. Even if it was small. Especially then. The eureka moment didn't arrive like thunder. It came quietly. Almost apologetically. While I was folding laundry. Claire had gone out for groceries. I was alone. The guest room smelled faintly of dryer sheets and something older like sun-warmed paper. I was putting away a stack of towels when I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser and found it. A small folder. Mismarked. Misfiled. Not mine. But familiar. It was one of Claire's old legal folders from her time at the library board. Notes on property endowments, donor procedures, grant templates. And in the middle of it all, a single sheet of paper with bold lettering across the top. Gift of property. Intent to restrict usage, independent donor authority. The language clicked somewhere deep in me. Like a lock long forgotten. I set the towels aside. Sat down on the edge of the bed. And read it again. My mind didn't wander out of confusion. It wandered out of clarity. I remembered the clause in our deed. The one I'd skimmed in grief years ago. After Harold's passing. If the property is no longer suitable for shared occupancy, the remaining deed holder may repurpose its value toward a cause in alignment with the couple's original intention. And what was our intention? Shelter. Learning. A quiet place to think. Harold had always said, "A house is just a container. It's what you put inside it that matters." We had filled ours with books. With students from the community college who came for tea and theory. With long conversations under lamplight. Where silence wasn't emptiness, but reflection. What if it could become that again? Not for Edward. Not for Kristen. but for someone who needed stillness. A woman learning to begin again. A retired teacher needing sanctuary. A student without family. Not a shelter, but a haven. A place with a shelf of Harold's books and an unlocked desk. A place that remembered. A place that welcomed. I stood. The thought didn't flutter like an idea. It rooted. Solid. Certain. This wasn't about reclaiming bricks and beams. This was about reclaiming authorship. He had erased my name from the invitations. But not from the deed. Not from the spirit of the home. I still had that. And I still had me. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be vengeful. It would be deliberate. Measured. Mine. I didn't know the paperwork yet. Didn't know the full path. But I knew what mattered. I had begun. Not tomorrow. Now. The law office hadn't changed. Same gray carpet. Same ticking clock above the receptionist's desk. Hand slow, certain, unbothered by urgency. Leonard came out to meet me. His gait more cautious than I remembered. He smiled kindly. Like someone who remembered more of your history than you might want. Marjorie, he said. Didn't think I'd see you in here again after Harold's estate settled. Neither did I replied. But I was here. Not for closure. For correction. He led me into a room with soft yellow walls and chairs that sighed when you sat down. The kind of room designed to hold hard truths gently. I laid the folder on the table. He opened it with a reverence that surprised me. Original deed, he noted. His eyes scanning the fine print. Then he looked up. Is something wrong? I could have said yes. I could have listed every wound in order. The party, the money, the silence. But instead, I said, something needs to be made right. He didn't interrupt. Didn't offer sympathy. Just waited. Which was, somehow, kinder. I told him about the clause. About the trust. About the withdrawals. About the boy who once built blanket forts in my living room. And now signed my name off checks I never approved. Leonard nodded slowly. The way one does when adding up a sum they already know the answer to. I want to restrict the future use of the house, I said. While I still can. Restrict it how? I want to convert its future value, its sale, its equity, its breathe into something Harold and I would have recognized. A space for knowledge. A space for restoration. A space where my name is not forgotten. He blinked. Then leaned back in his chair. That's possible, he said. There are legal pathways. But you'll need to reassert your authority as primary deed holder. And remove Edward as trustee. I know, I said. And I did. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I wanted to stop being erased. While still alive. Leonard reached for a notepad. Then let's begin. Outside, the trees were bare. Winter had stripped them clean. But even in the gray light, I saw small buds near the branches. Tight. Hidden. But waiting. So was I. Leonard slid the documents across the table. One by one. Each page crisp. Edges sharp as memory. This first one, he said, revokes Edward's authority over the trust. You'll assume sole discretion again. I nodded. Didn't reach for the pen just yet. The papers lay between us like fragile truths. Not loud. But undeniable. He tapped the second form. This one creates the new legal intent. To designate the property as a restricted legacy asset. It outlines the conditions of use. The preservation of your name. Your husband's contributions. The intention of space for learning, reflection, or housing purpose-aligned guests. Housing purpose-aligned guests. Even the language felt sterile. But beneath the cold legality was a quiet warmth. A future where someone would walk into those rooms and know they belonged to something thoughtful. Something generous. Something not built for profit or prestige. I picked up Harold's pen. The same one I'd used to sign my marriage license. My first teaching contract. The deed to the house. The weight hadn't changed. Only my hand had. It hovered for a moment. Not from doubt, but from grief. Not for what I was losing, but for what had already been taken. Without asking, I signed the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Each signature steadier than the last. Each loop and curve. A reclamation. Leonard collected the pages carefully. Next, we'll notarize. Then we file the revocation with the county. I'll begin preparing the property covenant. He paused. Would you like to name the space now? Some people find it meaningful. I thought for a moment. The Ellsworth Quiet House, I said. Not a museum. Not a monument. Just a place to think. A place to breathe again. He smiled. I think that suits you. I stood, my knees stiff but sure. Outside the window, the trees were still bare. But in my chest, I felt something I hadn't in months. Space. The kind that belongs to you. Not because someone gives it, but because you remember. You were never meant to disappear from it. I returned to the house on a Thursday afternoon. No announcement. No suitcase. Just a canvas bag with my keys, Harold's pen, and the signed documents tucked inside a thin envelope. The front door stuck for a second, as if unsure whether to welcome me. Then it gave way. Wood shifting against wood. Old things remembering how to open. The air inside was still, but not stale. Not like absence. Like waiting. I set my bag down in the entryway. My shoes made soft sounds against the pine floors. They remembered me. My weight. My rhythm. In the living room, a vase still sat where I had left it. The flowers long gone, but a faint ring of dried petals clung to the porcelain like memory. I walked slowly, touching corners with my eyes, letting the quiet settle around me. Like a shawl I hadn't worn in years. The house didn't ask questions. It didn't need explanations. It simply let me return. I opened the windows, one by one. Let the cold in. Let the light in. It filtered across the bookshelves, across Harold's chair, across the empty fireplace that had waited through every season, without complaint. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle, listened to it come to life. A low hum that grew into a soft hiss. While it boiled, I opened a drawer. The one with the old linen napkins. Folded edges. Slightly yellowed. They smelled like cedar and lemon oil. I set two out on the table. Not because I expected anyone, but because I wanted the house to remember what it meant to prepare. I poured one cup of tea. Sat down at the table. Across from me, an empty chair. But I didn't feel alone. I felt rightful. There would be more to do. Paperwork. Conversations. The slow turning of a wheel that had long been rusted. But not today. Today, I had opened the windows. I had returned the quiet to its rightful owner. I had taken back a space where my name belonged. Not on a plaque, but in the grain of the wood. And tomorrow, someone else would begin, exactly where I refused to end. It was Edward who knocked first. A soft, uncertain knock. 3 short raps. Like someone unsure if they should be there at all. I had been in the garden, trimming the rosemary back for spring. The shears still in my hand, damp soil beneath my nails. I opened the door slowly. There he was. In a navy coat. Hair too neat. Eyes scanning everything but me. Hi, Mom. His voice tried for casual, but it landed somewhere between forced and hollow. I got a call from the lawyer. I didn't step aside. Didn't block the door either. Just stood where I was. He cleared his throat. I didn't know you were making changes. To the trust. The deed. It's my name on them, I said. Evenly. Not unkind. Just true. He looked past me. Into the house. The light was soft. Filtered through clean windows. The smell of lemon oil hung in the entryway. Everything familiar. But no longer his. Why now? He asked. His brow creased. I mean, after all this time? I thought of answering. Of reminding him of the party. The silence. The name missing from the thank you speech. The account he emptied. Without ever looking me in the eye. But I didn't list those things. I didn't need to. Instead, I said. Because I remembered I was allowed to. He looked at me like he hadn't heard that before. Like the idea of me doing something without his permission was somehow foreign. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. The words landed like paper. Thin. Already curling at the edges. I know, I said. And I did. Because sometimes pain isn't delivered with cruelty. It arrives through omission. Through convenience. Through the belief that someone will always just step aside. He glanced down at the shears in my hand. Are you gardening again? I never stopped, I said. I just didn't have a place to grow anything in for a while. He nodded. But it wasn't understanding. It was resignation. The silence stretched between us. Not angry. But full. Like the moment before a storm decides whether to pass or stay. Then I stepped back. Not far. Just enough to close the door. Not slammed. Not fast. Just firm. A door that had once opened for him. Now returned to its hinges. Like it had finally remembered its own weight. He came back the next day. Didn't knock this time. Just stood there. On the porch. Holding a manila folder like it might explain something. I watched him through the kitchen window. He looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had simply grown back into myself. When I opened the door, he didn't speak right away. He held out the folder. These are the original projections, he said. For the sale. For the trust. What we were planning. I didn't take it. Didn't even look at it. I'm not selling, I said. Calm. Clear. He nodded, but it wasn't agreement. More like a muscle memory. How he used to nod when I said it was bedtime. Even as he crept toward the window. You could have talked to me, he said. You could have explained. I did, I said. In 100 different ways. But you were too busy curating. He looked away. Down the steps, toward the gravel path. It wasn't personal. No. I replied. That was the problem. We stood in silence. Not a fight. Not even tension. Just space. Finally, I stepped aside. This time, I let him in. He walked through the hallway slowly. His eyes flicked toward the photos on the wall. Ones he'd once helped me hang. Now framed anew. Surrounded by moments he no longer owned. At the fireplace, he stopped. There, on the mantel, was the new brass plate. The Ellsworth Quiet House. A home for voices once dismissed. He read it. Didn't touch it. Just stood very still. I didn't know, he said at last. That you felt removed. I turned to the window. The wind moved the lace curtains gently. Like someone parting hair. I didn't feel removed, I said. I was. He sat down on the edge of the sofa. The same one he once jumped on with chocolate hands. While I read him stories about bears who got lost and found their way home. You don't hate me, he said. No, I said. Hating you would mean giving you that much power. I've reclaimed it. He nodded again. This time slower. Less reflex. More real. In that moment, he finally understood that I hadn't burned bridges. I had simply stopped building them, where no one met me halfway. He didn't stay long after that. There was nothing left to negotiate. No papers to sign. No roles to perform. He stood, smoothed his coat like he always did when trying to gather dignity, and walked toward the front door. Halfway there, he paused. I suppose I'll let the others know, he said. About the change. About the house. About me. I didn't answer. Some acknowledgments come too late. To be received as gifts. He put his hand on the doorknob, then turned back. Dad would have liked this, he said, nodding toward the mantel, toward the quiet name etched into brass. It was the closest thing to an apology I would get. And maybe the only one I needed. He opened the door slowly, stepped out into the gray light. No slamming. No words left hanging. Just the sound of footsteps retreating down the wooden steps and into a life no longer tethered to mine. I stood there for a while, hand resting on the frame. The house was still again, but not empty. I moved to the mantel, touched the edge of the plaque with 2 fingers, just long enough to feel its temperature. Cool, grounded, real. Then I walked to the kitchen. Boiled water. The way I always had. But this time, I pulled out 2 cups. One for me. One for Harold. I sat at the table. The steam rose, curling gently into the air between us. I thought about all the women I knew, who had been thanked last, or not at all, whose names never made it into speeches, into deeds, into dinner conversations. This house would remember them, even if no one else did. The floor creaked softly as I leaned back. The light from the window touched the edge of Harold's chair. I didn't feel victorious. Just returned. Because justice, when done right, doesn't raise its voice. It simply stays. And this time, so would I. The mornings came slower now. Not heavy. Just unhurried. I no longer woke with a list in my head. No accounts to monitor. No calls to make. No silence to survive. The house had taken to the rhythm. Even the floors creaked differently. Less like old bones. More like quiet greetings. I began keeping the front window open. Just a few inches. Enough for the wind to carry in the scent of the rosemary bush I had coaxed back from the dead. It had browned badly over the winter. Edward once told me it should be pulled out. Said it had no life left. But sometimes, things don't bloom. Until you stop hovering over them. I made a new habit. Every morning after tea, I walked the length of the hallway. Slow. Measured. My hand brushed along the edge of the wall where Edward's height marks used to be. They had faded. But I could still feel them. I didn't paint over them. Didn't touch them. I let them exist quietly. Like an echo I didn't need to silence. One morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. Cream envelope. No return address. Just 2 short lines inside. I was one of Harold's students. You helped me once and never knew it. No name. No signature. But something about it made me sit down immediately. I read it again. And again. Letting the words move through me. Like something slow and good. That's what legacy really is, isn't it? Not the monuments. Not the plaques. But the small truths you'll never get credit for. Quiet kindnesses that outlive you. In someone else's whisper of gratitude. Later that week, Leonard called. The trust transition had finalized. The deed had been refiled. The nonprofit designation for the Ellsworth Quiet House was official. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne. Just the soft closing of a file folder. And the opening of the guest room curtains. I moved a writing desk into that room. Cleared the space. Washed the windows. Hung nothing on the walls. I didn't want inspiration. I wanted room. Room for someone else to arrive. To think. To remember. The house no longer needed to prove anything. And neither did I. Outside, the wind moved through the lilac bushes I had planted that spring. Not because I missed Ruth. But because I remembered her. Some names disappear. Some names return in bloom. The first visitor came on a Tuesday. A young woman. Quiet eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she held out the email confirmation from the local artist residency group. She had been accepted for a 2-week stay. No fee. No questions. Just space. She didn't know who I was. And I didn't tell her. I simply showed her the guest room, told her where the tea was, and asked if she preferred the window cracked at night. She said yes. And thank you. Twice. That evening, I passed by her door. It was ajar. She had lit a candle. The soft scent of cedar and something floral spilled into the hallway. She was writing. Head bowed. Shoulders no longer tense. I didn't interrupt. Just stood for a moment, hand resting on the wall, like one does at the edge of something sacred. Back in my room, I sat with a book I'd read a dozen times. The spine soft. Margins lined with Harold's notes. One line stood out more than the rest, circled twice in his familiar blue ink. To be remembered not for noise, but for quiet continuance. Is that not also a kind of triumph? I closed the book gently, ran my thumb along the edge. The room was quiet, but not hollow. Outside, the wind was changing, spring folding into early summer. The light lingered a little longer through the trees. That night, I stood at the back door with a cup of tea, looked out over the garden. It wasn't manicured, but it was alive. So was I. I thought about the years I spent asking to be seen, to be heard, to be remembered. And then I thought, perhaps the quiet is where we become most fully ourselves. Not erased, not exalted, just enough. The next morning, I left a note for the young woman. Just one sentence, on good paper, folded neatly beside the kettle. You are not invisible here. She never mentioned it. But the day she left behind a drawing on the table, an open window, a blooming lilac, and a single line etched at the bottom. Thank you for holding space. I pinned it above the writing desk. And now I ask you, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from, what does holding space mean to you? Have you ever found a place that let you exhale, without having to explain your breath? If so, I hope you stayed. If not, I hope you do. Because justice doesn't always look like verdicts. Sometimes, it's the right to remain, to matter quietly, to write your own ending. And if you're still searching, know this. You are not alone in your journey. Your story matters. We invite you to share your reflections below. And stay with us, here at Kamar FM, where every story is a second chance.